Hey guys, tonight we're climbing aboard the most glamorous, most meticulously engineered, and most thoroughly monitored workplace in American history. The 1960s airline cabin, where the coffee was hot, the smiles were mandatory, and the girdle was not up for discussion. Not the romance of it, not the glossy travel poster version with the perfect updo and the breezy wave on the jet bridge. The real one. The one where your waist measurement was recorded at the hiring interview, and your lipstick shade was specified by name in the employee manual. If this is the sort of quietly astonishing, deeply factual history that helps you drift off, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely want to keep waking up in other people's decades. And to whoever sent this topic in, thank you sincerely, and I hope you're sitting comfortably because we are about to get very specific about the length of your fingernails. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what hour it's landed on for you. It's always somehow 11 p.m. and someone's quietly raiding the kitchen, which, as it turns out, we're going to talk about. Dim the lights, switch on a fan for some soft white noise, get comfortable, and go ahead and take down any books you've been balancing on your head. You can put those away for tonight. Have you ever wondered what the job actually required of you? Why an airline had such firm opinions about your front teeth, specifically? Could you survive 6 weeks of residential training that ran from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and included emergency evacuation drills, posture correction, and a formal unit on how to smile with your lips parted? The girdle, required no matter your size, what exactly was it guarding against? Did you ever wonder who decided that cherries in the snow was the correct color of lipstick at 35,000 feet? What happened on the morning you turned 32? And who, precisely, was weighing you every 6 months and writing the number down? Congratulations! You've just woken up in Fort Worth, Texas, 1963, the first morning of stewardess training. There is a mirror set at waist height in the practice aisle, positioned so you can check your posture mid-step and correct it before you reach the next row. The book on your head is not a metaphor. Good luck. You sit across a desk from a woman with a clipboard, and the interview begins not with a question about you, but with a tape measure. Your height is recorded. Your weight is recorded. The distance around your hips, your waist, your bust, all of it written down in a column beside your name. You answer questions about your hobbies and your typing speed, but you understand that the numbers matter more than the answers. The job you're applying for has a body in mind, and you are here to find out whether yours qualifies. The requirements are printed. They do not apologize for themselves. American Airlines needs you between 5'2" and 5'9", between 105 and 135 pounds, proportional to height, between 21 and 26 years old. Your vision must be correctable to 20/20. These are not suggestions arranged loosely around a job. They are exact, fixed, and entirely uninterested in your circumstances. They are the job. A woman 2 inches too tall is thanked for her time. A woman 1 pound short is probably also thanked, but with more warmth, and asked to come back tomorrow if she can manage it. The medical portion comes next. A doctor examines your teeth, your front teeth specifically. Visible fillings disqualify you, which means your molars are fine, but your incisors are a professional liability. At some carriers, a gynecological exam is also included in what the airline calls a standard physical. Male employees in comparable roles are not asked to provide comparable data. The form has no second page for them. Let's talk about your front teeth again for a moment, because it is worth sitting with. Somewhere in 1962, an airline executive looked at a boarding aircraft and thought, what this operation needs is better dental optics in the smile zone. Not better food, not quieter engines, teeth, miss us. Carla Whitfield, the recruiter at the Fort Worth processing office, makes a small mark beside your name in a column you cannot read from your side of the desk. She does it the same way every time, a quick, clean tick like she is checking produce. She does not explain what the mark means. You are not meant to ask. The interview room itself has a full-length mirror on one wall. You are aware of it in the way you are aware of a test that has already started. You sit up straighter without deciding to. Your chin comes up a ½ inch. The mirror is not decorative. It is a participant. At American in 1961, the average stewardess lasted about 18 months. Most resigned to get married because marriage meant immediate termination under company policy, and the policy was not subtle about this. The airline knew the math when it set the hiring age at 21. You come in young, You leave before 27, you are replaced by someone younger. The workforce refreshes like a menu. Nobody at the corporate level announces this. Nobody has to. You find out later, from a woman in the dormitory who has been through 2 interviews at 2 different carriers, that recruiters specifically preferred candidates from small towns in the Midwest and South. The working theory, never published, was that city women were harder to manage. Recruiters believed rural women arrived with fewer opinions already formed. Whether that was true is a different question. Whether it shaped who got the clipboard checkmark is not. The tape measure goes back in the drawer. Mrs. Whitfield smiles in a way that is professionally warm and personally unreadable. She tells you someone will be in touch. You collect your coat from the hook by the door because you hung it on a hook and not the back of the chair, which you somehow knew was correct without being told. You walk to the elevator. You stand up straight the whole way. You undress in a small examination room while a doctor you have never met checks your teeth for visible fillings, inspects your skin, and notes the condition of your posture on a form. At some airlines, the examination goes further than you expected, and no one tells you in advance how far. The men applying for ground jobs down the hall are not examined this way. You sign the consent without reading all of it, because the line behind you is long and the appointment is brief. Your body, it turns out, is part of the application. The form has 6 pages. The first 2 are standard: blood pressure, vision, reflexes. Page 3 is where it gets specific: bust, waist, hips. Weight recorded to the nearest half pound, which is a level of precision usually reserved for postage and jewellery. A recruiter from American Airlines notes your measurements in a column next to the acceptable range, and the column is not forgiving. If you fall outside it, the column simply says no, and it doesn't explain itself further, because columns don't owe you that. Let's talk about the teeth. Pan Am's 1961 grooming manual was specific on this point. No visible fillings in the front teeth, not broken teeth, not missing teeth, filled teeth. The kind you get when you were 11 and didn't floss properly and no one told you this would one day be held against you at 30,000 feet. A woman named Margaret, let's say Margaret, because there were many Margarets, opens her mouth on cue, tilts her head back, and holds very still while a stranger with a clipboard peers in with the quiet authority of someone grading produce. None of this was required of the men doing comparable work on the ground. The men were examined for basic fitness. You are examined for fitness plus symmetry plus dental work plus posture plus the condition of your skin plus whether your hips are the right distance apart. It is a more thorough audit than most cars receive before they're approved for the road. The form has no second page for the recruiter, just the first. A recruiter named Mrs. Hendricks, solid posture, shoes with a sensible heel, works down the column with a pencil. She holds the way other people hold verdicts, neat, certain, and faintly final. Between 5'2" and 5'9", she checks the box. Between 105 and 135 pounds, proportional to your height, she checks the box. Vision correctable to 20/20, between 21 and 26 years old at higher. The age ceiling is hard. Not a suggestion. Not a range. You could not be 27. 27 was a different category of person entirely, and that category did not serve beverages at altitude. Then she watches you walk across the room and back. She does not tell you what she's looking for. She writes something down. You stand straighter. She writes something else. The walk, technically, is part of the exam. You will learn later that the correct walk is heel to toe, shoulders back, chin level, with a quality of forward momentum the training manual describes as purposeful ease, which is the most demanding kind of ease there is. If you pass, you're in. If you don't, the recruiter thanks you warmly, and the door closes with a softness that is somehow worse than a slam. The women who pass receive a letter on airline letterhead explaining what will happen next. 4 to 6 weeks of residential training, a schedule that runs from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., a dormitory, a uniform allowance, and a list of things to bring. The list specifies a hat with the regulation brim, 2 pairs of seamed stockings, and shoes with a heel no higher than the manual permits. Each item has a line. Each line is exact. The letter doesn't mention the weight checks that will follow you for the rest of your career. That's not on the first page either. You arrive at the training school with 1 suitcase and a schedule that has already decided what you will do every hour until you graduate. The day starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 10 p.m., and the hours in between belong to the airline. You will live here, in dormitory housing, for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Your meals, your bedtime, your free afternoons, all of it now runs on a printed timetable posted by the door. You came here to learn a job. You are also, it becomes clear, moving in. American Airlines runs its program out of Fort Worth, Texas. Delta is in Atlanta, United is in Chicago, TWA is in Kansas City. The geography changes. The timetable does not. Every morning, 100 or so women in pressed blouses file into classrooms that look like they can't decide if they're nursing school or a department store. The first 2 weeks are emergency procedures and first aid. You learn how to operate a Boeing 707 cabin door that weighs roughly 200 pounds. You are wearing heels. The door does not care about the heels. Let's talk about the schedule. It is residential, which is a word that sounds comfortable and means something considerably more structural. You don't go home. You don't wander into town for dinner. You eat what the timetable says, when the timetable says, in the building the timetable has assigned. This is basically a soul cycle retreat run by your employer, except you can be fired for gaining 4 pounds, and the enlightenment at the end is a pair of wings and a commuter flight to Tulsa. A woman named Joan sits across from you at breakfast on day 3. She has a notebook open already. She tells you she's from Decatur, Illinois. You are from a small town in Ohio. This is not a coincidence. Recruiters specifically preferred women from small Midwestern towns on the working theory that city women were harder to manage. Joan writes everything down. She already knows the difference between a DC-8 and a 707 by fuselage silhouette. She is going to be very good at this. The mornings belong to safety. The afternoons are where things get interesting. Grooming sessions fill the last 2 weeks of training, concentrated and deliberate, the way a finishing school schedules its most important subjects for the hours when the students are paying closest attention. You are taught to walk heel to toe across a tiled floor while an instructor watches from the side. You are taught to lower yourself from the knees with your back straight rather than bend at the waist, a distinction that sounds minor until you've practiced it 40 times and your knees have opinions about it. An instructor stands at the front of the practice cabin and corrects each woman aloud as she passes, calling out a dropped shoulder or a chin that has drifted, by name, in front of everyone. Of course, there is also the matter of the hemline. The 1963 American Training Manual fixes it to the exact inch, measured up from the floor with a ruler, the same on every woman in the class. A hemline half an inch off is treated as seriously as a missed safety check. You learn to peel them off finger by finger without looking, because looking at your hands while you do it reads as fussing, and fussing is not in the manual. The airline calls all of this professional development. The internal nickname, passed from class to class in lowered voices, is Charm School. Both names are accurate. Neither is the whole picture. What it actually is 16 hours a day of being reshaped by people who have thought very carefully about what a woman in your position should look like, from every angle, in every light, at every altitude. The curriculum covers emergency procedures, first aid, meal service, grooming, makeup, deportment, and something listed in the handbook as passenger psychology, which is the airline's way of saying you will learn to anticipate what a man wants before he decides he wants it. By the time the lights out hour arrives and the dormitory goes quiet, you are tired in a way that isn't quite physical. You lie on your assigned bed in your assigned room and think about the morning, which will begin when the schedule says it begins. The schedule has no snooze function. You step onto a scale on your first morning, and a number is written next to your name in a ledger. That number is now your assigned weight, and it is not a starting point, it is a ceiling. From here on you will be weighed at regular intervals, and the ledger will remember. 5 pounds over the line is not a private matter between you and your mirror. It is a matter for your supervisor, your file, and your paycheck. You are handed a uniform and a number, and the number is the part they actually enforce. United runs these checks every 6 months. You know this. You have always known this, the way you know a dentist appointment is coming, except the dentist cannot suspend you without pay until your jaw is the correct size. 5 pounds over your assigned number and you are off the schedule, not fired, just removed quietly from the rotation until the number comes back down. The ledger doesn't explain itself. The ledger just waits. Let's talk about what 5 pounds actually is. It is a bad week, a holiday, a wedding you attended. It is the structural consequence of working 8-hour shifts inside a sealed aluminum tube at 35,000 feet, where the air is dry and the meals are whatever was left on the trolley. You are expected to manage this privately, efficiently, and without visible distress. One stewardess keeps a tin of saltines in her bag. Another skips dinner 3 nights running before weigh-in. Neither of them discusses this out loud, because discussing it out loud is not in the manual, and the manual covers everything. The requirements going in are precise enough that precise is actually underselling it. American wants you between 5 feet 2 and 5 feet 9, between 105 and 135 pounds, proportional to height, proportional being a word that is doing considerable heavy lifting in that sentence. You must be between 21 and 26 years old at hire. Your vision must be correctable to 20/20. Your front teeth must show no visible fillings. At some carriers, the hiring medical exam includes hip, waist, and bust measurements taken by a company physician. The comparable exam for male employees in a similar role does not exist, because the comparable male role does not exist either. The girdle is not optional. This is clarified in writing. Regardless of how much you weigh, regardless of whether your assigned number is 107 or 132, the girdle is part of the uniform, and the uniform is non-negotiable. The supervisor has a position on the matter, so does the manual. Miranda, a check-in instructor whose clipboard appears to follow her of its own accord, demonstrates the correct standing posture. Weight back on the heels, shoulders dropped, chin parallel to the floor. She says the word carriage the way other people say oxygen. She means it the same way. You practice walking heel to toe down a corridor while she follows alongside, pressing 2 fingers flat against the small of your back to feel whether your spine has stayed where she put it. If your hips swing, she stops you and starts the corridor again from the top. American's 1963 training manual has a section devoted to the emergency oxygen mask, demonstrated to a row of empty seats in front of an instructor with a stopwatch. You reach overhead, pull the mask, fit it, and recite the cabin announcement in one continuous motion, and the manual times how long the sequence takes. Too slow, and you repeat it. Too rushed, and you repeat it. The manual calls the acceptable version professional presentation, which is its term for doing something difficult while appearing to find it effortless. The pay is $390 to $470 a month in 1963, which is modest in the way that a studio apartment is technically shelter. What the airlines are actually offering, and what you accepted, is nearly free air travel, at a time when flying costs roughly 6 cents a mile, and a transatlantic ticket runs several months' salary for the average American worker. You knew this going in. The number in the ledger, however, was not fully explained until you were already here, already weighed, already assigned. The ledger doesn't close between check-ins. It just sits there, remembering your number, patient as furniture. You sit at a long mirrored counter while an instructor demonstrates exactly how foundation goes on, in what order, and how much. This is not a friendly suggestion about looking nice. It is a lesson with correct answers. You learn the approved lipstick, the approved way to apply it, and the approved moment to reapply it during a flight. Your own face, the one you arrived with, is treated as a first draft. By the end of the session, you can reproduce a standardized version of yourself on demand, and you are expected to do exactly that. The lipstick is not a suggestion either. Pan Am's 1961 grooming manual specifies Revlon cherries in the snow by name, not a color range. Not a family of reds, that one. The manual exists. It has opinions. It has been laminated. Let's talk about what the manual also covers. Hair must sit above the collar. No strand may fall forward over the face during service, because a strand falling forward implies you have been doing something strenuous, and the implication must be avoided. Nails are permitted to extend a 1/4 inch beyond the fingertip, not 3/8. The rule is not arbitrary in the way you might assume. The rule is arbitrary in a much more committed way, the kind that required a meeting to produce. Meanwhile, the hat has rules of its own. It sits at a fixed angle, the brim level, secured with a pin placed exactly where the manual diagram shows the pin. A hat tilted 1/2 inch off true is a hat worn incorrectly, and a hat worn incorrectly is the kind of thing a supervisor notices from across a concourse. An instructor named Cora, clipboard, low heels, a handshake so efficient it borders on confrontational, demonstrates the walk. Heel to toe, weight centered. Shoulders neither forward nor pulled aggressively back, but arranged in a third position that exists only in airline training facilities and the collected works of European finishing schools. You practice this in the aisle, mock up, while Cora walks a half step behind, narrating each fault out loud as it happens. A heel landing flat, a shoulder creeping upward, so the whole class hears exactly where you went wrong. The crouch is its own module. You don't bend at the waist to reach the overhead bin or pick something up from the floor. You lower yourself from the knees, back straight, as if proposing marriage to the floor in a very controlled and professional manner. This is the approved technique. The fabric has opinions about bending, and the fabric wins. The smile has a specification too. There's a version of this that reads as warmth and a version that reads as mild alarm, and you spend a portion of one afternoon learning to reliably produce the first version while navigating a beverage cart in heels on a tilted training floor. American marketed all of this, publicly and with confidence, as equivalent to courses that young women pay thousands of dollars to receive at private finishing schools in Switzerland and France, which is basically an unpaid internship rebranded as a semester abroad, except the semester lasts 4 weeks, runs from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and the final exam involves a 200-pound aircraft door. The internal name for the grooming portion was Charm School. The airlines did not use that name publicly. Publicly it was Professional Development, which is the same content with better stationery. American contracted the Ophelia DeVore School of Self-Development in New York for grooming consulting. DeVore was an African-American model who founded one of the first modeling schools in the country in 1946, a fact the airline's marketing materials did not emphasize, because the airline's marketing materials had their own priorities, and those priorities had a particular demographic in mind. By the time the grooming sessions finish, you have learned to walk, stand, smile, lower yourself, and apply lipstick in a specific and reproducible sequence. The face in the mirror is yours. It is also not entirely yours anymore. It belongs in some technical sense to the manual. You walk the length of the room with a book balanced on your head, and you do not get to stop until it stays there on its own. This is posture training, and it is graded. The manual specifies erect carriage at all times, which means while you are demonstrating an oxygen mask, while you are pouring coffee, while you are doing anything a passenger might see. You practice until the book becomes unnecessary, until your spine has memorized the rule. The book is only the tool. The straight back is the actual assignment. The 1963 American Airlines Training Manual is specific about this. Not good posture, not stand up straight, erect carriage. The phrase appears in the same document that describes how to lower yourself into a crouch beside a passenger without hinging at the waist. The same document that specifies a smile held at a precise and friendly angle. The manual has opinions about your entire skeleton, top to bottom, and it has committed those opinions to print. Mirrors are installed in the aircraft aisles at waist height during training, not at face height, where you might check your lipstick. Waist height, where you can watch your own hips as you move through the cabin. The mirror isn't flattery, it's quality control. You serve a tray, correct your posture, serve another tray, correct again. The mirror doesn't say anything, it just reflects, with a quiet institutional patience that suggests it has all week. Meanwhile, the book is still on your head, and you are still holding the oxygen mask demonstration. The mask goes over the nose and mouth. Pull the tab to tighten. You have done this 40 times. Your neck has developed a small, private opinion about the 41st. The manual does not ask for your neck's opinion. The manual asks for erect carriage and a steady smile, simultaneously, while explaining that oxygen flow may not be visible even when the mask is functioning correctly. You demonstrate this with excellent posture. The book does not fall. You are doing very well. Let's talk about what the deportment drills are actually preparing you for. The cabin of a Boeing 707 at altitude is not a ballroom. It is a pressurized aluminum tube holding roughly 140 passengers, about 45% of whom are smoking, all of whom are generating a warm, close atmosphere of cigarette smoke, warm chicken, and the particular social tension of people sitting very close together for 8 hours without choosing to. Your job is to move through this environment as though none of it is happening, heel to toe, back straight, smile open, tray level, which is roughly the theatrical equivalent of performing a ballet recital inside a very full elevator. There is a practical dimension to all of this, though the manual doesn't linger on it. A Boeing 707 cabin door weighs about 200 pounds, and it is heavy, bulky, and completely indifferent to your training. During evacuation drills, Elena Torres, a trainee from outside Tulsa who has never missed a posture correction, wrenches it open in heels. She doesn't pause. She has practiced this too. The erect carriage helps here, actually. You need your full spine behind the pull. The book was useful after all, in a manner of speaking. The posture drills, the mirror work, the book, none of this is officially called what it is. The airline calls it professional development. The internal nickname is Charm School, which is at least honest about the direction things are moving. A 1961 American Airlines advertisement pointed out that the training was equivalent to courses young women paid thousands of dollars to receive at finishing schools in Switzerland and France. This is, to be clear, the kind of finishing school you do not pay for and cannot leave, except it runs 16 hours a day, and Switzerland does not weigh you every 6 months. You are taught how to walk down an aisle, as if the walk itself were part of the service. Heel to toe, narrow steps, no swing, no rush. When a seated passenger needs something, you do not bend at the waist. You lower yourself into a crouch, knees together, and speak from there. There is a right way to occupy 3 feet of carpet, and you are drilled in it until it stops feeling like a performance. The aisle is your stage and your office at the same time, and someone has already choreographed both. The trainer is still watching. A woman named Doreen, clipboard, sensible shoes, the unblinking calm of someone who has corrected this exact problem 400 times, stands at the front of the cabin mock-up and tracks you through every crouch. Shoulders back, she says, not as encouragement but as a correction filed for the record. Your posture is either correct or it isn't, and Doreen has no interest in your feelings about that. She watches you walk toward her, not the way someone watches a person walk, the way someone watches a piece of equipment run a diagnostic. You reach her. She writes something down. Let's talk about the crouch. It is not a natural human movement. Nobody crouches instinctively, knees together, back straight, to hand someone a cocktail napkin. The body wants to bend. The spine has a whole plan for how it would like this transaction to go. You practice the crouch until your thighs have opinions about it, and then you practice it more. The passenger above you should see only a composed face at approximately armrest level, delivering a warm but not over-familiar expression, like a very professional vending machine. The smile is also trained. Lips parted, not too wide. Wide reads as anxious. You want approachable, the specific warmth of someone who has nowhere else to be and no problems you are aware of. You hold this expression while holding a drink tray, while lowering into the crouch, while the passenger asks you to check on his connecting flight time, which you cannot actually check on, but you smile as if you are already working on it. The smile is not dishonest exactly, it has simply been optimized. Meanwhile, the aisle itself is working against you. A 707 economy cabin is roughly 20 inches between armrests on each side. Passengers adjust seats without warning. Carry-on bags occupy the floor in unauthorized configurations. The service cart, fully loaded, weighs close to 200 pounds and has the turning radius of a small boat. You navigate this in heels. While crouching, smiling, and maintaining erect carriage, and Doreen at the front of the cabin catches the whole thing and does not applaud. The walk is not separate from the work. The walk is the work. Every passage down the aisle happens under the eyes of every seated row on both sides, the way a stage is watched the second the curtain lifts. Other professionals have desks, doors, chairs that face walls. You have a corridor 11 inches wider than your shoulders, and the audience is already seated. Sonia, a trainee from outside Tulsa, gets the crouch right by Thursday. She's been practicing in her dorm room. Her roommate has been timing her. You put on a girdle before you put on the uniform, and you do this every working day, regardless of what you weigh. The undergarment is not optional and not based on need. It is part of the uniform the way the jacket and the gloves are part of the uniform. You learn the order things go on, the way each piece is supposed to sit, and the inspection that confirms you have done it correctly. Getting dressed for work is itself a checklist, and a supervisor may run through it before you ever reach the plane. The girdle's job is not structural. You are already within your assigned weight. You were weighed 6 months ago, and you'll be weighed again in 6 months, and the number was acceptable. The girdle is there because the silhouette requires it, because the skirt is cut to a single fixed shape, and that shape was specified down to the seam by someone in a design office in New York who has never spent 8 hours crouching in a pressurized tube at 35,000 feet. You put it on, The skirt sits the way the pattern says it should. The uniform itself cost around $800 in 1965, which is roughly $7,700 today, and you did not choose it. American had Donald Brooks, TWA had Howard Greer, United had Don Loper. These are not department store names, these are couturiers, brought in to design something that read as glamour from the jetway, and held its shape through a 6-hour flight with 140 passengers eating warmed chicken and smoking continuously. The uniform arrived pressed and specific. Your job was to remain inside it without disturbing it. Braniff had a different theory. In 1965, they hired Emilio Pucci and photographer Richard Avedon and launched what they called the Air Strip. The Pucci colours were named pumpkin, turquoise, grape, and chartreuse, which sounds like a paint swatch from a very confident decorator. A Braniff stewardess boarded wearing a full-length plastic bubble helmet over her head. Over the course of the flight, the layers came off. The tagline was, "Does your wife know you're flying with us?" Braniff said this out loud, in advertisements, with their name attached to it. The bubble helmet did not survive the decade. Pacific Southwest Airlines went a different direction and arrived at the same destination. By 1966, PSA required hot pink miniskirts. The miniskirt is not a garment that benefits from the knees together crouch. You crouch anyway. A supervisor down the line confirms that you are crouching correctly. Meanwhile, a supervisor named Margaret Chen walks the pre-flight line with a clipboard held at her hip and pauses in front of each woman the way a piano tuner pauses before a note she already knows is slightly off. She doesn't say what she's looking at. She writes something. She moves on. The clipboard has never once said anything encouraging, as far as anyone can tell. The inspection covers hair, above the collar, not forward over the face during service. Nails, no more than a 1/4 inch beyond the fingertip. The lipstick is specified too, cherries in the snow, and nothing adjacent to it. A specific product, from a specific brand, in a specific shade, named after fruit in a winter landscape. You own 3 tubes. One is for flying, one is for the bag, and one is somewhere in the dormitory that you have not found since Tuesday. None of this is applied to the men doing comparable work, because there are essentially no men doing comparable work, and the hiring exam made sure of that from the start. The medical intake at American included a check of your front teeth for visible fillings. No filling visible from the front. The logic was never written down anywhere you could find it, but the inspection happened, and you opened your mouth, and someone looked. At some carriers, the exam also included a gynecological component. The male employees were not examined this way. The form had no second page. You finish the checklist. The jacket sits correctly. The girdle is under everything, holding its position, unbothered and absolute. You pick up your bag. You are, by every measurable standard the airline has invented, correct. You learn that your hair is not allowed to fall forward over your face during service, and that it must be worn above the collar at all times. Your fingernails may extend no more than a 1/4 inch beyond your fingertip, polished in a colour from an approved list. These are written rules printed in a manual, checked by people whose entire job is to check. You spend real effort each morning making sure a single strand of hair will obey a regulation. The grooming standards are specific down to the 1/4 inch, and the 1/4 inch gets enforced. The specificity becomes almost architectural. Cherries in the snow is the lipstick. Not a lipstick. Not a red lipstick. That one. The manual names it the way a building code names a load-bearing wall. Hair above the collar. Nails a 1/4 inch. No more, no exceptions. The required girdle under the uniform, because the uniform has a silhouette, and the silhouette has a contract with the airline, and the airline has strong feelings about the outcome. You are, from collar to hem, a document that has been carefully edited. During training, some carriers install mirrors at waist height along the aircraft aisle so that you can correct your posture mid-service, mid-step, mid-reach, in real time, with a tray in your hands. The mirror doesn't compliment you. It is honest, literal, and entirely uninterested. It just reports. You crouch, not bend, when picking something up, because bending is what people do when no one is watching, and someone is always watching, and also the mirror is right there. A 1963 American Airlines training manual specifies that you should be able to demonstrate the emergency oxygen mask procedure with a book balanced on your head. The book is not symbolic. The book is a book. It is on your head. You are explaining what to do if the cabin depressurizes. Inez, one of the grooming instructors at the Fort Worth facility, walks the aisle during posture drills with the quiet patience of someone who has corrected the same shoulder rotation 800 times and fully intends to correct it 800 more. She stops behind you. She doesn't say anything. You straighten. This is the communication system. The walk itself has a method. Heel to toe, not flat-footed, not rushed, not the way you walk through every airport, every dorm hallway, every parking lot before this. You walk as if the floor is asking something of you and you are answering politely. A smile held, not clenched. Erect carriage, which is what the manual calls a posture that your spine has never previously been asked to sustain for 8 consecutive hours. The smile is also documented. Teeth visible. Not too much. The amount is written down somewhere. You trust that it is. All of this is publicly described as professional development. Internally, everyone calls it charm school, with the tone of voice that means everyone knows exactly what it is. The airlines market it to recruits as equivalent to the courses young women pay thousands of dollars to receive at private finishing schools in Switzerland and France, which is the finishing school framing all over again, except this term ends with a weight check and a mirror at your hip. You are not paying tuition. You are, in some technical sense, being paid. The pay is $390 a month in 1963, which covers your share of a small apartment and a reasonable amount of cherries in the snow. The approved colour list exists because the unapproved colours also exist, and someone had to draw the line, and the line is a 1/4 inch past your fingertip and a specific, exact, non-negotiable shade of red. The manual has opinions. The manual has always had opinions. You follow them carefully, every morning, in front of a mirror that is the correct height to correct you. In the uniform the airline issued, with hair that will not fall forward, because forward is not in the manual and the manual is the job. You stand in front of a Boeing 707 cabin door that weighs about 200 pounds and your job is to open it in an emergency, in heels, while everyone behind you is panicking. The evacuation drill is timed. You learn the sequence, the handle, the slide, the count, and you repeat it until your hands move without consultation. The same training that taught you to balance a book on your head also expects you to wrench open a door built for someone twice your size. Both are part of the certification, and you are expected to pass both before you ever serve a meal. The first 2 weeks of training are almost entirely this. Emergency procedures, first aid, fire suppression, oxygen systems, and evacuation sequencing fill the schedule before grooming gets a single hour. You memorize exit locations for aircraft you haven't boarded yet. You practice the brace command until you can deliver it at the correct volume without sounding like you're apologizing. The 707 slide deploys in under 3 seconds, and will take your arm with it if you're not braced correctly. The slide does not care about your nail length. 200 pounds of pressurized aluminum, and you are expected to move it fast. Not eventually, not with assistance, fast. United Stewardesses evacuated a crashed DC-8 at Denver in roughly 4 minutes. The standard was 90 seconds. 4 minutes, in real smoke, with a full cabin, in heels. The door did not check whether your lipstick was cherries in the snow. A trainer named Gretchen, compact, flat-voiced, the kind of woman who says again, the way other people say good morning, watches you practice the handle sequence from a folding chair. She doesn't look up when you get it right. She looks up when you hesitate. The hesitation is what she's tracking. Her attention is steady, patient, and faintly relentless. You do it again. You do it until there is no hesitation left anywhere in your body, and then she tells you to go fix your hair. The same document that confirms you can evacuate a pressurized aircraft in an emergency also confirms that you can smile while crouching rather than bending. The Federal Aviation Administration cares about the first part. The airline cares about both equally. The passenger, in theory, benefits from both. The passenger is mostly thinking about the drink cart. The physical standards for this job include a weight limit, a height window, an age cap, and correctable vision to 20/20. They also include the ability to operate emergency equipment on a moving aircraft. These requirements coexist on the same application without apparent irony. You are evaluated on your waist measurement and on whether you can locate a life vest in a darkened cabin in under 10 seconds. The form has room for both. Base pay in 1963 runs between $390 and $470 a month. Not nothing, but not remarkable. The genuine compensation is the travel. nearly free air travel at a moment when flying costs about 6 cents a mile, and a round trip to Europe represents a month's salary for most Americans. You are, in effect, being paid partly in access to a world the job was designed to sell. The arrangement is tidy in the way that slightly uncomfortable arrangements often are. The door and the deportment are not contradictions. They are the same job, which is to say the product is a woman in a fitted uniform who can wrench open 200 pounds of aluminum, deliver the brace command without flinching, and still arrive at your row with a composed expression, a steady tray, and the correct lipstick. The passenger gets both at once. The door is part of it. You spend the first 2 weeks of training not on grooming but on first aid, learning to manage a passenger who faints, chokes, goes into labour, or stops breathing at 35,000 feet. You earn a certification you are required to keep current. The first 2 weeks are medical. The grooming comes afterward. You memorize procedures for emergencies most flights will never have, because the one flight that does will not give you time to read. Before anyone teaches you the approved lipstick, they teach you how to keep a stranger alive. The curriculum is specific: cardiac compression, airway obstruction, diabetic episode. Premature birth, yes, that one is on the list. You practice on mannequins that smell faintly of rubber and institutional optimism, in a room with fluorescent lighting and a clock on the wall that is always somehow both too loud and too slow. The mannequin doesn't complain. You learn from that. The Boeing 707 cabin door weighs about 200 pounds. During the evacuation drill, you open it, in heels. The door does not care about your heel height. The door does not care about your certification, your posture, your Revlon-approved lipstick, or the fact that you have been awake since 6 a.m. The door has one position it prefers and one position it tolerates, and your job is to find out which is which before the drill examiner marks down your time. You get one chance to be slow. You don't get two. Slides deploy on a hinge mechanism that requires your full body weight to trigger correctly. A Calfa, actually. No, wrong century. A drill instructor named something like Gloria, who has the calm of a woman who has failed 12 trainees this month and is not upset about it, watches you from a clipboard distance and writes a number down. The number is your evacuation time. The acceptable number is under 90 seconds for a full cabin. United Stewardesses once evacuated a crashed DC-8 at Denver in about 4 minutes. That's the full plane. That's the bar. First aid training fills the mornings. The afternoons are debriefs, scenario runs, written exams on procedures. You are tested on what to do if a passenger's heart stops. You are also tested on whether your nail length is within a 1/4 inch of your fingertip. These tests are not administered by the same person, but they carry roughly the same institutional weight. The mannequin doesn't know that. The mannequin is focused. The safety training is genuinely rigorous, and the airlines neither advertise this nor hide it. A stewardess who can't manage a decompression event or a passenger in anaphylactic shock is a liability at altitude in a way that no amount of excellent posture corrects. The 707 doesn't have a supervisor on call. You are the supervisor. You are also the medic. You are also the person expected to smile during beverage service 20 minutes after confirming no one has died. By the end of week 2, you know CPR, airway management, basic obstetric emergency response, and how to operate emergency equipment in an aircraft that is no longer behaving as an aircraft. You can wrench a 200-pound door open in the dark. You can deploy a slide and direct 40 people down it before any of them have processed what is happening. Then week 3 begins. Someone hands you a book. It is light, ordinary, and absurd. You balance it on your head. An instructor walks the line of trainees with a clipboard, checking that each chin stays level and each spine stays vertical while the book rides up top. The book doesn't move. Neither do you. This is also, apparently, professional development. You work a galley the size of a closet, reheating and plating meals for a cabin full of people who paid a great deal to be fed well. In first class, this means real china, silver, a roast carved from a trolley in the aisle, and dessert assembled by hand. You do all of it standing up, at altitude, while the aircraft moves underneath you without warning. The training covered the order of service, the placement of the fork, the temperature of the coffee. What it could not fully cover is doing all of it during turbulence. The food is real food. Pan Am First Class has foie gras, roast beef, and individual baked Alaska assembled on a china plate, delivered with silver service at 35,000 feet. The baked Alaska is a logistical challenge on the ground. In a narrow aisle, with 40 rows of passengers watching, and a galley that fits approximately one human being at full extension, it is something else. You don't think about that too hard. The cabin smells like three things simultaneously: warmed chicken, jet fuel, and cigarette smoke, dense, ambient, structural, because roughly 45% of the adults on this plane smoke, and they are smoking right now, during dinner, and will smoke again immediately after. Working a full flight is essentially an 8-hour shift inside a cocktail lounge with the windows sealed. The smoke has nowhere to go, so it simply stays. It coats the interior and your hair and your uniform and your smile, which you are maintaining at all times, which the training specifically covered. The trolley weighs considerably more than it looks, and the aisle is considerably narrower than it appears from a seat. Marcus, a training supervisor at the Fort Worth facility, once demonstrated the correct trolley braking technique with the focused expression of a man diffusing something. You hold it from the back. You let it lead into the turn. You do not let it lead into a passenger. The trolley does not care about any of this. The trolley is heavy, willful, and faintly malicious, with its own ideas about momentum, and at 30,000 feet those ideas are occasionally wrong. Coach class is a different calculation. Fewer courses, smaller portions, faster service, more people, 150 passengers expecting a hot meal inside a window of time that doesn't fully accommodate 150 hot meals. You move. The training called this efficient service flow. What it actually is controlled sprinting in heels, with a smile, while carrying warm plates, through a crowd of people who would like more coffee and are only slightly apologetic about asking. The uniform stays exactly as inspected. Jacket buttoned, hat pinned at the regulation angle, hose seams straight, hemline checked against a ruler before you ever boarded. The look is the product, and the product must be consistent at all times, including during the baked Alaska. Nothing about the cabin is allowed to show on you. Somewhere in coach, a passenger taps the armrest and a man in 14C decides this is a good moment to ask you where you're from. The training called this passenger psychology. You answer. You smile, because the manual specified a smile and a closed mouth reads as tense. You refill his coffee. You move on. The trolley, for the moment, cooperates. The job description, if you wrote it honestly, would run to several pages. Emergency evacuation in 90 seconds. Premature birth response. Silver service roast beef at altitude. A smile held steady through anything. Trolley navigation in a 30-inch aisle. 8 consecutive hours of cigarette smoke. The baked Alaska. Somebody's getting a second baked Alaska. You know this before they ask. You are handed a script for the nervous passenger before you ever meet one. Training calls it passenger psychology, and it teaches you to spot the first-time flyer by the grip on the armrest, the eyes fixed on the window, the question asked a little too casually. You learn specific things to say, practiced in role play until they sound unrehearsed. The fear is real and the reassurance is scripted, and your job is to deliver the second so smoothly that the first lets go of the armrest. You are part hostess, part safety crew, and part performance you have memorized. The script has a tone, warm but not gushing, calm but not bored. You practice it in pairs, one trainee playing the passenger, the other playing you, while an instructor at the front of the room watches your hands. Your hands are not allowed to flutter. A flutter signals panic, and panic is contagious at 35,000 feet in a way it simply is not on the ground. The instructor makes a note. You switch roles. You practice being scared so you know what it looks like from the other side. The safety demonstration happens before every flight, and by the end of your first month you have done it enough times that the oxygen mask goes on your face with the same muscle memory as brushing your teeth. The 1963 American Airlines manual adds one detail. While demonstrating the mask, you keep your chin up and your shoulders square, the cup of the mask cradled just so the gesture reads as calm instead of clinical. The manual cares how the rescue looks, not only whether it works. Now, the door. A Boeing 707 cabin door weighs about 200 pounds. You are expected to open it during an evacuation, in heels, in roughly the same time it takes someone to decide what to order at a diner. United Stewardesses evacuated a crashed DC-8 at Denver in about 4 minutes. The 90-second standard is the benchmark. 4 minutes is what actually happened, under real conditions, with real smoke, and it still counted as a success. The door has no opinion about any of this. It simply weighs what it weighs. The passenger watching you point to the exit sees a composed woman in a couture uniform who smells faintly of cherries in the snow. What they do not see is the same woman 2 weeks ago, learning how to wrench 200 pounds of metal open in an emergency while keeping her expression at the approximate warmth of a Sunday brunch hostess. The reassuring one, the strong one, the rehearsed one, both are required. Neither cancels the other out. Dorothy Kim, a training instructor, known to trainees mostly by her posture, which is aggressively correct at all times, tells you during week 2 that passengers do not die of turbulence, they die of panic. So your job, during moderate turbulence, is to pick up a coffee pot and keep walking, not because the coffee is urgent, because a woman walking calmly with a coffee pot is the most efficient anti-panic device the airline has access to at altitude. The coffee pot is, functionally, a prop. It is patient, dutiful, and quietly complicit. It knows this. It cooperates. You absorb the fear in the room so the room doesn't have to feel it. You spend 8 hours watching every face in the cabin so none of them start watching each other's, and you do it while also delivering meals, managing the smoke situation, and maintaining erect carriage. The performance has a dress code. The dress code includes the girdle. The passenger lets go of the armrest. Your script worked. You move to the next row, coffee pot level, smile with your lips parted because the manual specified parted and closed reads as tense, and the cabin holds together for another hour at 35,000 feet. You learn that certain passengers come with a file. The airline keeps a list of prominent persons and their preferences, and you are expected to know who is aboard and what they like before the door closes. 2. A first-class passenger's comfort is described in the manual as paramount, second only to safety. You address them by name once it is confirmed, offer the adjustment before it is requested, and remember that the man in seat 2A may be on the list. The service is personal by design, and the personalization is researched well in advance. The file itself isn't handed to you. You don't receive a manila folder at the gate like a detective briefing. The senior stewardess has it, has read it, and will tell you what you need to know in the galley in about 45 seconds before boarding completes. Senator on 4B drinks scotch, no ice, has a name he prefers, and does not enjoy being asked how his flight was. A studio executive on 2A always wants his pillow squared. You will square the pillow. You will do this without being asked, and you will do it without making eye contact that suggests you think squaring a pillow is an unusual thing to do. The first-class cabin is not a cabin. It is a project. Pan Am's 707 first-class runs, foie gras, roast beef carved from a trolley, and individual baked Alaska on china with silver service. All of this at 35,000 feet, in a tube moving at 600 miles per hour, in a cabin thick with cigarette smoke, because roughly 45% of adults smoke and the ashtray is bolted to the armrest. You serve a full restaurant meal through mild turbulence while wearing heels and keeping your spine vertical. The foie gras is rich, serene, and supremely unbothered. The foie gras does not know the plane is moving. You are required to agree with the foie gras. Meanwhile, your personal preferences about anything are not on file anywhere. A complaint from a passenger on the list doesn't go in a suggestion box. It goes upward, and the system that keeps notes on what Mr. Whitmore in 2A prefers for his pillow, squared, firm, turned just so, also keeps notes on what happened the last time someone served him incorrectly. The blacklist isn't called a blacklist. Nothing in this industry is called what it is. But it functions like a credit score, one that tracks how much you smiled and whether the scotch arrived before he noticed it was late. A stewardess named Helen Marsh, based in New York, keeps a small card in her apron pocket during transatlantic routes. On it she has written, in her own hand, the names and preferences of the 8 most frequent first-class travellers on her usual rotation, not because the airline gave her the card. Because Helen has been doing this long enough to know that being ahead of the file is the only way to feel like the file isn't entirely about you. She refills the scotch. She squares the pillow. She folds the card back into her pocket with the practiced efficiency of someone who has decided that competence is the closest available thing to autonomy. The cabin, from the outside, looks like hospitality. From the inside, it is a performance with assigned marks, a researched audience, and no intermission. You know the seat numbers. You know the names. You know that the man in 4B finds small talk intrusive, and the woman in 6A is celebrating an anniversary and told the check-in agent, Who told the gate agent? Who told the senior stewardess? Who told you? You offer a small acknowledgement. Not effusive, just warm enough that she knows someone noticed. She smiles. The smoke drifts. The baked Alaska holds its shape through another 5 degrees of turbulence, which is more structural integrity than most things in this system have managed. You work an 8-hour shift in a cabin where nearly half the passengers are smoking and there is no window to open. The smoke settles into your hair, your uniform, the back of your throat. The air is dry, the engines are loud enough that you raise your voice without noticing, and the smell of cigarettes mixes with reheated chicken and jet fuel for the length of the flight. None of this counts as an emergency. It is simply the working environment every day, and you serve coffee through it with the approved smile. The 707 recirculates cabin air, which in 1965 means it recirculates everything currently in the cabin air: smoke, perfume, the particular ambitions of whoever had the window seat in 14A. The filters are not built for this. The filters are doing their best. The filters have long since given up. You finish a flight smelling like you spent 8 hours inside a lit cigarette. You do not comment on this. The passenger who asks for a third bourbon at 11 a.m. does not comment on it either. There is a working agreement between everyone in this cabin. What happens at altitude stays at altitude, and everybody pretends the air is fine. The noise is its own problem. A 707 cruising at 35,000 feet produces about 90 decibels in the cabin, roughly the volume of a motorcycle idling at your elbow. You learn to read lips. A flight attendant named Cora Dupree, who worked the Chicago to Los Angeles route through 1967, develops a technique of nodding with her chin slightly forward so passengers feel heard even when she has caught only every third word. It works well enough. The passengers think she is unusually attentive. She is unusually tired. The dry air is relentless. Cabin humidity on a long haul runs around 10 to 15%, drier than most deserts, drier than the waiting room of a complaints office. Your skin knows it within the first hour. Your eyes know it by hour 3. By hour 6, your throat is doing something you can only describe as complaining quietly to itself. You have been trained to keep the smile up for most of the flight, which leaves your mouth open more than it would otherwise be, which does not help. And yet the approved response to all of this is composure. Not comfort, composure. You stand straight, you move heel to toe, you lower yourself at the knees rather than bend at the waist, and you do not let the smoke or the noise or the sandpaper air register anywhere on your face. The uniform is pressed, creaseless, and faintly miraculous. The smile is present. You are, officially, having a wonderful time. The physical load is real in ways the training films don't mention. The galley is roughly the size of a generous closet. You work in it for 8 hours, pivoting between a heating unit and a cart, neither of which was designed with your comfort as a priority. The cart, when fully loaded with meals for a first-class cabin, weighs about as much as a determined golden retriever. You push it down the aisle in heels, on carpet, over the light turbulence above Kansas, and you do not spill. Meanwhile, the passengers smoke. The man in 6C has been working on his pipe since Denver. The woman across the aisle has a cigarette going that she is not quite smoking, just maintaining, the way some people maintain a grudge. The smoke pools near the ceiling and then, because physics doesn't check the dress code, descends anyway. By the time you collect the meal trays, the cabin has the atmospheric quality of a jazz club at closing time, except the jazz club is moving at 600 miles per hour and you are still responsible for everyone's comfort. You land. You deplane the passengers with the same smile you boarded them with, which by now has the structural integrity of something load-bearing and very tired. The crew bus takes you to the layover hotel. In the elevator, nobody speaks. Cora Dupree is already asleep standing up, or something close enough that the distinction doesn't matter. Tomorrow the route reverses. The smoke will be the same smoke. The smile will be the same smile. The 707 does not take days off, and neither do you. You do not tell the airline if you get married, because if you do, you are expected to resign. The rule is not a secret and not unusual. It is the industry standard, written into the terms of the job. A married stewardess, the logic goes, is distracted and hard to schedule, so the airline simply does not employ one. If you have a husband, you keep him off the records. Your personal life is now a condition of employment, and the condition is that, on paper, you do not have one. The math works out cleanly for the airlines, which is why they like it. At American in 1961, the average tenure is about 18 months. Women hire on, work the routes, and then resign to marry. Management does not need to promote you, give you raises proportional to experience, or accommodate a changing life, because your life, contractually, does not change. You are always 23 and available and new, and every few weeks, a fresh class graduates and walks the line in matching heels, young, pressed, and replaceable. The pipeline never empties. In 1964, Eula Nix turns 32. She does not crash a plane. She does not fail an inspection. She does not gain 6 pounds or show up in the wrong lipstick. She turns 32, which Delta has determined is the outer boundary of employable femininity, and she is let go. American has held this line since 1953. The official explanation, when pressed, is passenger preference, a thing the airlines claim exists but decline to document. The preference is unpublished. The preference has never been surveyed. The preference is simply known, the way a rule is known when the people making it have no intention of defending it out loud. The age ceiling and the marriage ban run on the same clock. You are hired at 23, and the countdown starts before you have unpacked your first layover bag, gone to a husband or gone to a birthday, but gone, before you ever cost the airline a raise. Patricia Banks, hired by American in 1963, understands this without being told. Most women understand it without being told. The terms are in the contract. The contract has very good handwriting. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, created by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, begins receiving stewardess complaints almost immediately. They arrive handwritten, by the dozen, mailed from layover hotels between flights. Sonia Pressman Fuentes, an EEOC attorney, takes these cases seriously. Her colleagues, mostly male, find the complaints mildly amusing. The idea that a glamorous job with free travel constitutes a civil rights issue does not register for them as urgent. Fuentes pushes anyway. The EEOC rules in 1968 that mandatory resignation upon marriage is illegal sex discrimination. The airlines comply slowly, in the specific way that institutions comply when compliance requires them to admit they were wrong. A stewardess who files a complaint risks something more immediate than a legal timeline, though. The carriers share information. You ask a question in writing once, and then your applications go unanswered across the industry, and you never find out which letter did it. There is no file you can see and no number you can dispute. There is only how easy you were to work with, remembered by the people who do the hiring. It is not written down. It does not have to be. What you actually do, if you get married in 1963, is tell no one at work. You leave the ring at home on the days you fly. Janet Moreau, a United girl on the Denver routes, known for keeping her hat pinned at an angle that should not, geometrically, work, slides her ring into the front pocket of her uniform case before boarding and retrieves it at the gate on landing. She has done this for 11 months. The case smells faintly of the talc she keeps tucked in the corner. The ring rides in the inner pocket of the case, under a folded square of tissue, where no supervisor would think to look. The EEOC ruling changes the rule on paper. It takes several more years to change it in practice, and a few more after that to change the tone of the exit interview when a woman announces she is leaving to get married. The interviewer always nods, writes something brief, and thanks her for her service. The form has a line for reason of departure. The line is very short. You learn early that the job has an expiration date, and it is your 32nd birthday. At many airlines, a stewardess is required to leave service at 32, regardless of how good she has become at it. The reason offered is that passengers simply prefer a younger face, supported by surveys no one is allowed to see. So you do the arithmetic on your own age the way you might watch a clock. The skills you are building have a shelf life the airline has already decided, and the date is printed, quietly, on you. Delta fired Eula Nix in 1964, the year she turned 32, not because of a complaint, not because of a performance review, because the calendar moved forward, as calendars do, and her birthday arrived without apologizing for itself. She had done everything right. The calendar had done everything right too. The policy saw no conflict here. The American had enforced its age 32 cutoff since 1953, which means the rule predates the jet age, predates the Boeing 707, predates most of the passengers currently complaining about their seatback adjustment. It was already there when you arrived. It will still be there when you leave, slightly before you'd planned. Passenger preference, they said. Travelers simply prefer younger cabin crew. This was stated with the calm confidence of a fact that has never once been tested in a controlled environment. The surveys supporting this claim were not published. They were not shared with the EEOC. They existed, you were told, and you were expected to find that sufficient. The surveys have the energy of homeworker dog ate. Meanwhile, a captain on the same flight retires at 60. His experience accumulates. It becomes a credential. Yours has a countdown timer bolted to it. The timer does not care how smoothly you carved the roast beef in first class, or how cleanly you wrenched open a 200-pound door in a drill. The timer has one setting. You are hired between 21 and 26. You are trained for 4 to 6 weeks in a residential facility that controls your sleep, your diet, and your posture. You are shaped, precisely, into what the airline needs. And then you are given, at maximum, 11 years before the policy reaches into your career and cancels it. Most women don't make 11 years anyway. Marriage ends it first, on average around the 18-month mark. The age cutoff is mostly hypothetical for the majority of the workforce. It exists anyway. The timer is set for 32 whether or not you ever reach it, and the timer does not negotiate. A woman named Frances Draper, senior flight crew Dallas routes, practiced the heel-to-toe walk until it required no thought whatsoever, straightens before boarding, not vanity, habit. She adjusts her collar with 2 fingers, exactly as trained, and boards the plane. She is 31 years and 4 months old. She has done this 10,000 times. The gesture is efficient, automatic, and will belong to a different person's job in 8 months. The professional argument the airlines made, when pressed, was that youth communicated vitality, which communicated safety, which communicated modernity. The Boeing 707 was new, the routes were new, everything needed to feel new. An experienced 34-year-old apparently disrupted this message in ways that were difficult to quantify but deeply felt by executives making the decision. It is the logic of a showroom car. The preference isn't for quality, it's for the appearance of freshness, which is a different thing entirely and expires faster. The EEOC would eventually rule the marriage ban illegal in 1968. The age cutoff took longer. The complaints filed against it risked the informal blacklisting that Sonia Pressman Fuentes already knew about from the inside. A carrier that considered you difficult to manage could make sure the next carrier heard about it first. You could fight the rule, or you could keep working. The form didn't offer both, so you watch the number. You smile, heels together, shoulders square exactly as the manual diagrams it. The date is already printed. You just haven't reached it yet. You open your first paycheck and find a number that is respectable but not glamorous. A few $100s a month. Middle class, ordinary. The glamour is not in the pay. It is in the travel. You can fly almost anywhere for almost nothing in an era when a single cross-country ticket costs an ordinary person a small fortune. So you take the modest salary and you spend the perk, weekending in places your hometown has only seen in magazines. The wage is the part you live on. The travel is the part you took the job for. The number on the paycheck is somewhere between $390 and $470 a month in 1963, which is decent for a young woman without a graduate degree, and considerably less decent once you've factored in dry cleaning, 2 pairs of regulation heels, and the running cost of regulation cosmetics that the uniform code treats as part of the job. The lipstick is not reimbursed. The hosiery is not reimbursed. They are simply assumed line items the airline expects you to carry yourself. The flight benefit is another matter entirely. You fly on standby, which means you show up in uniform, well composed, nails a 1/4 inch beyond the fingertip, lipstick at regulation depth, and you wait. If there's a seat, it's yours for almost nothing. A cross-country ticket in 1965 cost a civilian about 6 cents a mile, which adds up fast. You pay a fraction of that. You go anyway. Most weekends where you have 2 days together, you go somewhere. Paris once, Mexico City twice. A girl from your training class named Beverly Marsh takes every available weekend to Honolulu, methodically. The way some people collect stamps except with better humidity. Recruiters specifically wanted you from a small town, Cresco, Iowa, somewhere like that. Somewhere that had 1 diner and a grain elevator and not much else. A city girl, the theory went, was harder to impress and harder to manage. A girl from a small town arrives at a Miami layover and finds the whole thing miraculous. She smiles more genuinely. She complains less visibly. She costs the same amount to employ and is considerably easier to retain, at least until she resigns to get married, which she will in about 18 months. The travel benefit is why the retention math works at all. Base pay alone doesn't explain why intelligent, capable women submitted to biannual weigh-ins and posture drills, and the particular indignity of a hiring dentist examining their front teeth for visible fillings. The travel explains it. In 1963, flying commercially is still something most Americans do rarely, if ever. You do it constantly, for essentially nothing. You are 23 years old, from a town with one traffic light, and you have stood in a Pan Am first-class cabin watching a man eat roast beef carved from a trolley at 35,000 feet, followed by an individual baked Alaska on real china with a silver fork. You have done this on a Tuesday. The job's social profile is modest in ways the recruiting brochures don't mention. You are not a stewardess because you failed to do something else. Most of your training class had college credits or nursing backgrounds or both. But the job doesn't pay like a profession. It pays like a starter position at a department store, with a worldwide flight map stapled to the back of the offer letter as compensation for the gap. Continental under Bob Six gave its stewardesses a reading list, world history, geography, current events, so they could converse intelligently with international passengers, which is basically a book club assigned by HR, sitting on the same shelf as the weight chart. You read the books. You discuss the Suez Canal with a businessman in 3B who does not ask where you went to school. He is genial, distracted, and thoroughly incurious. He asks if you could bring him another bourbon. You bring him another bourbon. You smile, which is the required configuration. He doesn't read the books. The paycheck clears. The flight benefit renews. Beverly, from training, has been to Honolulu 7 times now, and she has the photographs to prove it, lined up on the dresser of the apartment she shares with 2 other stewardesses, all of them 24, all of them broke, all of them airborne, all of them technically employed by the same set of rules, all of them spending the perks as fast as they accumulate them, because the rules also say the whole arrangement ends at 32. You were recruited out of a small town, and that was not an accident. The airlines preferred women from the Midwest and the South, from places without much sophistication, on the theory that you would be easier to train and easier to manage than a city woman. You arrive grateful, which is part of the design. The job lifts you out of a place where the options were few, and in exchange you accept rules a more worldly applicant might have questioned. The recruiter saw all of this clearly. You are only beginning to. The recruiter visited your county, or a town near enough to yours. She was polished in a way you had not seen up close. Squared shoulders, cherries in the snow lips, a uniform that suggested both authority and decoration simultaneously. She sat across a table in a hotel conference room borrowed for the afternoon, and she assessed your teeth, your posture, your fingernails, your approximate relationship to 130 pounds. Her gaze was patient, thorough, and faintly proprietary. She asked if you had any plans to marry soon. You said no. She wrote something on a form. The form did not ask this of your brother. Maybe a clerical job at a grain co-op. Maybe a school teacher's contract waiting in September, which paid roughly the same as the airline and smelled considerably worse. Maybe just a town that had stopped expanding in 1952 and was quietly waiting for everyone to notice. The airline didn't promise you a career exactly. It promised you the world, which was easier to deliver than a career and photographed better for the brochure. Patricia Ann Holbrook, from a town outside Columbus with one traffic light and a hardware store that doubled as the post office, sits in the hotel conference room next to you. She folds her hands the way someone taught her to fold hands. She has done something with her hair that took 40 minutes and will not survive the flight home. She wants this badly. You both do. That want is visible, and the recruiter has learned to read it like a weather map. The theory behind small-town recruiting was not mysterious. A woman from Chicago or New York had already developed opinions. She had already negotiated things, rejected things, walked away from situations that didn't suit her. She knew what a union was. She had possibly read a newspaper with a critical perspective toward institutions that scheduled a young woman's weigh-ins and dictated the shade of her lipstick. The airlines found this quality inconvenient. You, from a town with one traffic light, arrived without that particular inconvenience pre-installed. You were, in the language of the brochure, moldable. In the language everyone else used quietly, you were manageable. The gratitude the airline designed into your arrival did real work. The job was genuinely better than the alternatives. The travel benefit was genuinely extraordinary. The training was genuinely thorough, genuinely polished, genuinely impressive by the standards of any institution that had ever paid attention to you. All of that was real, and all of it produced a recruit who was unlikely to object to much, because objecting felt ungrateful, and ungrateful felt wrong in a body raised to be accommodating. Patricia hands her form back. The recruiter reads it without expression, then sets it on the small stack of forms she will keep. Patricia gets the call back. You get the call back. You will both report to Fort Worth in 3 weeks with your hair above the collar, your nails trimmed to a 1/4 inch past the fingertip, and a willingness to be remade into something the airline had already imagined before you arrived. The recruiter flies home. Her lipstick is still perfect. Yours has not survived the afternoon. You are issued a complete uniform, coat, dresses, hat, gloves, shoes, accessories, paid for entirely by the airline and worth more than 2 months of your salary. You do not own it so much as wear it on the airline's behalf. You are required to appear in it correctly assembled whenever you are in an airport or aboard a plane, and you can be disciplined for getting it wrong. A loose glove, a missing hat, a wrinkle in the wrong place. Each is a violation. The uniform is an investment, and you are the one responsible for protecting it. A full kit in 1965 runs around $800. That's roughly $7,700 in today's money. Donald Brooks designed Americans. Don Loper did United's. Howard Greer handled TWA. These are not people who make office wear. These are people who make things that appear in vogue and then retire to homes with pools. Your employer has hired them to design something you will wear while handing out dinner rolls at 35,000 feet. And the result is that you are, by any reasonable measure, better dressed than almost anyone you will ever serve. The hat is not optional. The hat is the point. It sits at a precise angle, not front, not back, but the exact diagonal that reads as professional rather than festive. It is small, stiff, and quietly non-negotiable. A stewardess named Ginny Weir, during her first walk-through inspection in Fort Worth, has her hat repositioned 3 times by the same supervisor, each adjustment smaller than the last, until the supervisor nods once and moves on without comment. Ginny does not move. The hat does not move either. They have reached an understanding. Now, the gloves. You wear them in the terminal. You wear them at the gate. You remove them once you board, fold them, and place them somewhere they will not get creased, because creased gloves are a conversation nobody wants to have at 7 a.m. The gloves are white at American, which is an interesting choice for a job that involves loading trays, handling luggage, and working in a pressurized metal tube with 120 people who have just consumed airline coffee. The uniform requires a girdle. Not suggested, required. This is true regardless of your size, your weight, or the outcome of your 6-month weigh-in. The girdle is structural. It is part of the silhouette. The silhouette is the product. You are wearing architecture. The girdle does not care how you feel about the girdle. Neither does the manual. The shoes have a heel height. The heel is not for comfort. The heel is for proportion, for the correct visual line from shoulder to floor that the airline's marketing department has decided represents competence and femininity simultaneously. You walk heel to toe, not toe to heel, which is already how most people walk, but now it is policy, and therefore something you can fail. You practice this on a linoleum floor in Fort Worth while a woman with a clipboard watches your feet. She is watching your feet more closely than most people have ever watched anything, and yet the most remarkable piece is the one that gets the least press coverage. The lipstick is not a colour range, not a general family of rose-adjacent tones. Revlon cherries in the snow. By name. The manual has opinions about your face that are more specific than your own. You do not choose your lipstick. The manual has already chosen it for you, deliberately, permanently, before you ever opened your own compact. You are, in this regard, less a woman getting dressed in the morning and more a very well-documented product launch. You bring the uniform home every evening and hang it immediately. You lint roll it. You inspect the seams. You check the buttons. The airline has given you the outfit, and the airline can take you out of service if the outfit looks like it's been lived in, which it has, because you live in it 8 hours at a time, in a smoke-filled cabin that smells of warmed chicken and ambition. The uniform is supposed to look like it just arrived from a department store window. So does everything else about this job. You work for Braniff in 1965, which means your uniform is designed to come off, not all at once, and not improperly, but in stages, on a schedule, as the flight progresses. You board in one layer, including at one point a full plastic bubble helmet, and you remove pieces as the cabin warms, down to a short shift at cruising altitude. The airline calls it the airstrip and advertises it openly. You are not simply wearing the uniform, you are performing it, one garment at a time, in front of a paying audience. The designer is Emilio Pucci. His colours are pumpkin, turquoise, grape and chartreuse, which sounds like a paint swatch from a very confident decorator but is in fact your professional wardrobe. The bubble helmet is clear plastic, fitted over a full coiffure, and serves no aeronautical function whatsoever. It exists to be removed, slowly, in front of people who paid for coach. The helmet comes off at the gate, the jacket comes off somewhere over Oklahoma, and by the time you reach cruising altitude, you're in a short shift that would have been considered beachwear at most American municipal pools. Braniff's marketing tagline for the campaign is, "Does your wife know you're flying with us?" The photographs were taken by Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon, who photographed Audrey Hepburn and Twiggy in the Paris collections, was hired to document the staged removal of an airline employee's jacket. Nobody in any boardroom appears to have found this unusual. The ad ran in major publications and was considered a success. The metric for success was that men talked about it. Now, Braniff was not alone in this general direction. Pacific Southwest Airlines, PSA, based in California, required hot pink miniskirts by 1966, not suggested. Required. The skirts were short enough that PSA printed the phrase "Hi there" on the seat of the matching underwear, which passengers would see when stewardesses reached for the overhead compartment. This detail is real. PSA considered it charming. PSA was operating an airline. Publicly, the other carriers were horrified. Privately, their marketing departments were watching very carefully. The logic was straightforward. The Civil Aeronautics Board fixed domestic ticket prices, so airlines could not undercut each other on fare. They competed on service, and service meant cabin crew, and cabin crew meant the question of exactly how short a skirt could get before the Federal Aviation Administration developed an opinion. The FAA did not, in fact, develop an opinion. The skirts got shorter. A Braniff stewardess named Carol, working the Dallas to Houston route, about an hour in the air, removes the bubble helmet at boarding, hands it to a gate agent, who receives it with the practiced expression of someone who has long since stopped asking questions, then takes her position in the aisle. The Pucci jacket follows somewhere past Waco. She does not break her posture during any of this. She was trained not to. Whatever else the airstrip was, it was executed with the deportment of a finishing school graduate, which was in fact exactly what Braniff's 4-week residential program had been designed to produce. The campaign photographs show women who appear entirely composed. That composure was not an accident. It was the product of weeks of drills, posture instruction held to an exacting inspection standard, and the understanding, clearly stated, never written down, that you do not look uncomfortable while performing a thing that might make you uncomfortable. You smile on cue. You stand with erect carriage. You remove your jacket over Waco like you've done it 100 times, which, after training, you have. The airstrip ran for several seasons. It became the thing people remembered about Braniff the way people remember a restaurant's most notorious dish rather than anything on the regular menu. Pucci went on to other projects. The bubble helmet was quietly retired. Carol kept flying. You are handed a reading list along with your weight chart. Continental wants you able to converse intelligently with cosmopolitan passengers, so you are given material on world history and geography to study. The reading is genuine and the expectation is real. A passenger in first class may want to discuss Rome, and you are meant to keep up. It sits oddly beside the posture drills and the grooming checks, this idea that you should also be well read. You are being trained to be decorative and informed at the same time, and both get graded. The reading list is, in its way, a book club assigned by HR, sitting on the same shelf as the weight chart. Bob Six, who runs Continental, has a specific vision. His stewardesses should be able to hold a conversation with a diplomat, a senator, a businessman who has strong opinions about the Peloponnesian War and wants someone to have them back at him, you read. You study. You are also, simultaneously, required to keep your hair above your collar and your nails to a 1/4 inch beyond the fingertip. The two requirements coexist without comment. the way a very thorough job description always buries the strange parts in the middle. The cabin smells like cigarette smoke, warmed chicken, and something adjacent to jet fuel that never quite leaves your uniform. About 45% of adults smoke in 1965, and a significant portion of them are on this flight, and the plane is essentially a pressurized tube in which everyone has agreed to sit inside the same slowly thickening air for 8 hours. You smile through it. Your smile, per training, shows the upper teeth. Not all the teeth, just the upper ones. The manual has opinions about teeth. A flight attendant named Dolores, who has read the continental geography materials, who can locate Ankara on a map without hesitating, who knows the difference between the Habsburgs and the Hohenzollerns, moves through the cabin with a tray that has decided, independently, that it wants to tip slightly to the left. She corrects it with the practiced neutrality of someone who has been correcting trays for 2 years and has stopped finding it notable. She does not bend at the waist. She crouches the way the manual taught her, knees first, back straight. You are carrying serious professional knowledge, emergency evacuation, first aid, the weight of a 707 door at 200 pounds, the exact sequence of a water landing, inside a person who will be weighed in 6 months and suspended without pay if the number is wrong. The safety training is real. The geography reading is real. The regulation hat issued for inspection day is also real, useless for any task aloft, decorative, and entirely mandatory, with no safety application and no geographic relevance, and simply there because the manual says it should be. The public framing for all of this is that you're receiving an education equivalent to a European finishing school, the same Swiss finishing school the recruitment ad promised, minus the tuition and plus a 6 a.m. start. A 1961 American Airlines advertisement makes this claim directly, with confidence. The women reading the ad in the application pool find it appealing, which is the intended response. The women already inside the training facility at Fort Worth at 6 a.m. find it slightly less persuasive, but they are busy demonstrating the oxygen mask with a supervisor timing the seal, so they don't have time to write in. You finish the chapter on the Roman Empire. You put it down. Somewhere on the same tray is a note about your waist measurement from last week. Both are equally official. Both arrived in the same institutional envelope, more or less. Rome fell, the note observes, for a variety of reasons. Your waistline has 30 days. You live in dormitory housing during training, and the rules do not stop when class ends. There is a curfew, there are inspections, there are expectations about who you see, when you sleep, and how you behave on your own time, because on your own time you are still representing the airline. You share a room, a bathroom, and a schedule with other candidates, all of you measured against the same standards. The residential setup is sold to you as convenience. In practice, it means the airline supervises you around the clock, awake or asleep. The day starts at 6 a.m. and runs to 10 p.m. That is not a typo. 16 hours of classroom instruction, posture drills, meal service rehearsal, emergency procedure, and grooming assessment, and then lights out, and then 6 a.m. again. Your schedule runs like a boarding school that bills itself as a finishing school, except the headmistress can suspend your pay for £4. The inspections happen before class, sometimes after, occasionally without warning in between. A supervisor walks the dormitory hallway, and you stand at the doorway in your uniform, and she looks at you the way a produce manager looks at a shipment of tomatoes. She checks your hair. She checks your nails, which cannot extend more than a quarter inch beyond the fingertip. She checks that your seams run straight and your shoes hold a regulation shine. Then she checks the next girl, who is standing at the next doorway in the same posture, having learned the same lesson on day 1. Marjorie, a supervisor at American's Fort Worth facility, is known for carrying a small notepad. She writes in it with the measured calm of someone settling a very minor debt. Her manner is brisk, courteous, and utterly unreadable. You don't know what she writes. You don't ask. The notepad goes wherever she goes, and the candidates who last the full 4 weeks are the ones who stopped wondering about it somewhere around day 5. The dormitory itself is clean and functional and offers you approximately the personal freedom of a well-staffed aquarium. You can walk to the vending machines. You can talk quietly with your roommate after hours. You can not go out. You can not have visitors. The airline controls your diet during cafeteria hours, your sleep through the curfew, and your appearance through the inspections. And the thing is, none of this is hidden from you. You agreed to it. It was in the brochure. The brochure called it a structured professional environment, which is technically accurate in the same way that saying the ocean is damp is technically accurate. The mirrors in the training hallways are set at waist height, not eye height, waist height, so that as you walk you can see whether your hips are level, whether your posture is correct, whether the skirt falls the way the manual says it falls. You don't look at your own face in these mirrors. The mirror reflects your hemline back at you and reports nothing else. The mirror is holding the airline's posture for it, a standard parked inside your body for the duration. It is a calm, patient, temporary tenant, and it does not pay rent. And yet, by any standard available in 1963, this is not a bad deal. The pay is modest, somewhere between $390 and $470 a month, but the flight benefits are nearly free travel at a moment in history when flying costs about 6 cents a mile and most Americans have never left their home state. You came from a small town in Iowa or Tennessee or Oklahoma. The airline recruiters specifically wanted you from there on the theory that city women were harder to manage. They were not wrong. You are not hard to manage. You demonstrate the oxygen mask while holding a textbook posture nobody will ever let slip, and you do it correctly, and you do not ask why the standard exists, because the manual does not explain why the standard exists. It is simply there. It is part of the curriculum, and for now, so is everyone watching you keep it. You step on the scale at a routine check, and the number is wrong, which is to say it is too high. The consequence is not a warning. You are placed on weight suspension, sent home without pay until you bring the number back under the line. The job waits, unpaid, while you eat less and weigh yourself daily. There is no appeal to the scale. You lose the weight, or you lose the income, and the airline has arranged things so that the two are the same decision. United runs these checks every 6 months. The threshold is £5, not 15, not 20. £5, which is roughly the weight of a hardcover dictionary, or a bag of flour, or the difference between a Tuesday and a Thursday depending on how lunch went. £5 over your assigned number and you are suspended without pay. The assigned number, by the way, was assigned to you. You did not choose it. It was chosen for you at hire, proportional to your height, written into your contract with the same administrative confidence as your badge number and your base salary. Not in the abstract, in the specific. You start monitoring food with the focus of someone managing a very small, very anxious budget. Lunch becomes a calculation. Dinner becomes a negotiation. You weigh yourself before the uniform goes on and again after, just to understand the math. A colleague named Sandra, who has been flying Chicago to Los Angeles for 3 years, keeps a pocket notebook with her daily numbers the way an accountant keeps a ledger. The columns are neat, precise, and quietly relentless. She does not find this unusual. Neither do you, anymore. The notebook is just part of the job, like the heel-to-toe walk and the smile that begins before you reach the door. The airlines did not design this to be cruel, they designed it to be efficient. The uniform has a silhouette. The silhouette is a product. The product has specifications, and the specifications have a weight range, and the weight range has a 6-month check, and the check has a consequence, and the consequence has no timeline. You go home. The debt doesn't pause. The check does. The airline holds your seat, technically, while the math resolves itself in your favour. This is basically a performance improvement plan, except the performance being improved is your mass. The women who stayed learned to work around the calendar. Weigh-in week meant certain things and not others. Lighter meals, more water, less of whatever had made last Tuesday feel celebratory. You develop a rhythm for it, the same way you developed a rhythm for the uniform inspection and the hair check and the seam that had to run dead straight from cap to heel. The body becomes a managed project. The project has quarterly deliverables. The deliverables are biological. Delta fired Euler Nix in 1964 because she turned 32. She had not gained weight. She had not violated a uniform code. She had simply passed through time at the standard human rate, which the airline had already identified in writing as grounds for termination. The age 32 cutoff had been at American since 1953, and Delta wasn't far behind. Airlines defended this with what they called a customer taste, never published, never audited, and never shared with the women it ended. The data was confidential, the standard was firm, and the column was final. Euler Nix did not get a second opinion. The form had one column. None of this appeared in the recruitment brochures, which featured soft-focus photographs of women laughing near window seats in cities that sounded like destinations: Rome, Tokyo, London. The brochures did not include the scale. The scale was in the contract. You manage your body the way you manage your schedule, because the next weigh-in is always coming. You learn which foods to skip, how to read your own weight by feel, how to drop a pound in a hurry before a check. The methods are not healthy and no one pretends otherwise, but the alternative is suspension. Years later, you will still be running the arithmetic, still picking up habits you picked up right here. For now, you simply do what the number requires, and the number requires a lot. You are wearing a girdle right now, regardless of what you weigh, because the uniform manual requires it and the uniform manual does not have a section for exceptions. It sits under your skirt from pushback to gate arrival, through the cigarette smoke and the warm chicken smell and the 8 hours of crouching at armrest level to hand someone a drink without bending at the waist. The girdle has no opinion about whether you need it. The girdle simply comes with the job. The cabin is its own physics problem. You've been trained to crouch rather than bend, to walk heel to toe, to smile with your shoulders back and your weight on your heels, and to do all of this inside a pressurized aluminum tube where 45% of the passengers are actively smoking. By hour 3, your eyes sting. By hour 5, your uniform has absorbed the cabin air so completely that it is carrying the smell home with it. A full 707 at altitude runs about the same atmospheric conditions as a well-upholstered cocktail lounge, except the cocktail lounge lets you sit down. Marjorie, a flight attendant at American in 1964, can eat the in-flight meals, or she can make weight on Friday. She generally picks Friday. The hot meals come out of the galley beautifully. Roast beef, actual china, silver service in first class, fragrant, generous, and entirely off limits. She plates every tray with the same care whether or not she takes one for herself. She sets a tray down in front of a passenger and straightens up with the posture of someone who has been drilled on it since February. The 6-month weigh-in is the visible part. The rest you carry on your own. The grooming standard you check against constantly because no supervisor has to be present for it to apply. You internalize it. Eventually it runs on its own, because you're checking anyway, constantly, the way you check the number on the scale, the way you check the calendar for the next weigh-in date. It's basically a fitness tracker, except it runs entirely in your head and the consequences are financial. The toll shows up sideways. Years later, you will still be cutting your food into quarters out of habit, still cataloguing what you ate by the end of the day, still feeling the arithmetic of it long after you've left the industry entirely. For a while you will not recognize hunger as hunger, just as a number that needed to stay in range. The habits are quiet, durable, permanent. They were designed to be. And yet, when the airline advertises the role, none of this appears in the copy. What appears is the travel, the uniform, the glamour of being the face of a brand at 35,000 feet. The gap between the advertisement and the actual working conditions is roughly the size of a 5-pound suspension threshold, which is to say, not large, which is to say, exactly large enough. You learn quickly that complaining has a cost, and the cost is your whole career, not just this job. The airlines share information about women who cause trouble, and a stewardess labelled difficult at one carrier can find herself unhireable at all of them, so you weigh every grievance against that risk. The unfair weigh-in, the supervisor with a grudge, the rule that makes no sense, you absorb them, because the alternative is a quiet word passed between companies that no record will ever show. Silence here is not agreement, it is self-preservation. The system that tracks you has no official name and no paper trail, which is exactly how it likes to operate. It works the way certain things in certain industries have always worked. A supervisor at one carrier mentions your name to a friend at another over coffee, with a slight tonal shift on the word difficult, and the hiring manager 3 states away hears that shift clearly. No letter is written, no form is filed. The list does not exist, which is the list's favourite thing about itself. It works anyway. It is a reputation, kept in a currency nobody names, how cheerfully you accepted things you shouldn't have had to accept. At the EEOC, an attorney named Sonia Pressman Fuentes knows exactly what the complaints mean. She has read them. She has organized them. She has tried, more than once, to move them up the internal chain at an agency theoretically created to address this kind of thing. Her male colleagues find the stewardess cases amusing. Not the facts, the category. A grown woman, a government lawyer, spending her afternoons on questions about girdles and lipstick shades and whether a 32-year-old is too old to hand out pillows. Sonia keeps a straight face. The cases stay on her desk, stacked, patient, accumulating. She keeps pushing. Meanwhile, the women who do complain understand the math immediately. Eula Nix worked for Delta for years. She is 32 inches 1964, which means she is done, not because she has done anything wrong. The rule says 32, and 32 is what she has become. She is let go with the same administrative tidiness that a lease expires. Delta does not call this a firing. The rule does not call itself a rule. It calls itself a standard, which is a different word for the same thing when you are the one standing outside the building. You are not Eula Nix, but you know the shape of what happened to her because you have always known the shape. The age limit has been Americans' policy since 1953. The airlines defend it with something they call passenger preference, which is an unpublished claim about what the travelling public supposedly wants. You asked to see the study. There is no study. There is a man in an office who is very sure the study would agree with him if it existed. The preference exists because the airlines say it exists, and you do not ask twice because you have seen what happens to people who ask. A stewardess who files a formal complaint risks the quiet word, yes, but she also risks something more immediate. Her supervisor has a long memory and a short review cycle, and a manner that is calm, courteous, and entirely unhurried. The next month her schedule changes. The good runs go to someone else. She picks up the red-eye to a city she did not request, then another, then a layover that lands her home at 4 in the morning before a 6 a.m. report. None of this is punishment. It is simply scheduling. The scheduling simply happens to make your life considerably harder for reasons that are never written down. The paperwork is clean. Your situation is not. The 1964 Civil Rights Act creates the EEOC. The EEOC rules in 1968 that mandatory resignation upon marriage is illegal. Sex discrimination. 4 years pass between the law existing and the rule changing. That is 4 years of women handing in resignation letters the week they get engaged because a ring is, on paper, a 2-week notice. They know the law exists. They know it applies to them. They also know that fighting it individually, with your name attached and your employer watching, is a different thing from a law existing in principle. Sonia Fuentes keeps pushing from inside. The women on the planes wait. The clock runs. Slow, indifferent, expensive. You carry all of this the same way you carry the girdle and the half-eaten dinner and the number from the last way in. Not announced. Not resolved. Just present, with the particular weight of something that doesn't have a form to fill out yet. You are the first African-American stewardess your airline has hired, and you board knowing it. The resistance to hiring you was explicit, defended for years with the same argument the airlines used to keep older women off the plane, that the customer simply preferred someone younger. It took letters from the NAACP to airline presidents to move the needle at all. Now you do the job under a scrutiny no one else faces, where every small mistake is also a verdict on whether women like you should have been hired in the first place. The uniform is the same as everyone else's. The margin you are allowed for error is not. Ruth Carroll Taylor was hired by Mohawk Airlines on February 11, 1958. She flew, she did the job. She was not rehired. The official record does not explain this. It rarely does. American hired Patricia Banks in 1963, 5 years after Taylor. United integrated 2 years after that. The timeline is not an accident. 5 years, then 2 more, is not the speed of caution. It is the speed of a thing being done slowly enough that nobody important has to feel hurried. The grooming standards are already precise for everyone. For you, they acquire a second layer. Your hair must meet the same requirements. Above the collar, no forward fall during service, but the scrutiny around how you meet them carries a different weight. The white instructor who runs the charm school section of training watches your posture with an attention she doesn't apply evenly around the room. You balance the book on your head and demonstrate the oxygen mask anyway, because the 1963 manual requires it of everyone, and you are not going to be the one who doesn't. American contracted the Ophelia DeVore School of Self-Development for consulting on the appearance curriculum. DeVore was an African-American model and entrepreneur who founded one of the first modeling schools in the United States in 1946. The airline brought her in to write down what elegance looked like, paragraph by paragraph. For women it would put in front of paying passengers. Then it spent years refusing to hire women who looked like her. Meanwhile, a supervisor named Loretta, clipboard always at parade rest against her left forearm, stops you in the galley aisle to note that your lipstick has faded since boarding. Her expression is polite, careful, and exactly as warm as a clipboard. The approved color is Revlon cherries in the snow, same as every other woman on this aircraft. You touch it up. Loretta moves on. She will stop you twice more before landing. She stops the woman in seat service ahead of you once. The passengers are their own category of experience. Most say nothing unusual. A few say something. One says something to you that he would not say to anyone else on this crew, in a tone he has clearly used before, the way you use a word you know and trust. You smile, not because you feel like it, because the smile is load-bearing, because the whole argument that women like you should not be here is waiting for you to stop smiling first. You smile and you do not stop. The pay is the same as your colleagues, somewhere between $390 and $470 a month in 1963, which is not the point anyway. The point is the travel. The point is Chicago to London in a single shift, which is something most people from Cresco, Iowa, or from wherever you grew up, did not do. You do it. You have done it. You will do it again next Tuesday, assuming the weight check clears, assuming the lipstick holds, assuming the smile stays exact, steady, in place for the duration of a flight that is, in every official record, routine. You are taught how to greet people you will almost never meet on the ground, a visiting officer, a foreign dignitary, a man whose name the airline has flagged. There is a correct address for each, a correct posture, a correct distance to keep. You practice the greetings the way you practice the safety drills until they are automatic. The training assumes you will host the powerful and the famous, and it prepares you to do it without hesitation. Most flights bring neither. You learn the protocol anyway, because the one flight that does will not give you a warning. The airline keeps notes, not on you, on them. A card in a system somewhere says that Senator Holloway prefers the aisle, takes his coffee black, and does not enjoy being addressed by first name before he has addressed you. A card for Ambassador Vries notes that he speaks 4 languages and will appreciate it if you do not attempt any of them. You do not see the cards see you. Your job is to already know what is on them, which you accomplish through a combination of the pre-flight briefing, the manifest, and a kind of institutional telepathy that the training implies you will develop naturally by week 3. There is a correct distance, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to seem indifferent. The manual calls it attentive proximity. You practice it with an instructor named Mrs. Patrice Holt, who stands very still and tells you when you've crossed the line. Mrs. Holt has the posture of a woman who has never once leaned on a counter in her life, and a gaze that is level, steady, and faintly geological. She corrects your distance with a single eyebrow. You adjust. She does not say good. She moves on. The address protocols run about 2 pages. General officers get rank, then surname. Foreign ministers get the title in English unless the training notes specify otherwise. Clergy get Father or Your Excellency depending on a distinction the manual explains in careful detail, and you memorize and will use exactly once. On a flight from New York to Rome in 1967, successfully, after which the Archbishop says nothing and returns to his breviary. That is the whole story. You count it as a win. Of course, most flights do not contain an Archbishop. Most flights contain a man in a brown suit reading a Tom Clancy paperback and a woman with a toddler who has already distributed crackers across 4 rows. You greet them with the same attentive proximity. The toddler does not acknowledge the protocol. The crackers are everywhere. You smile, per the manual, and lower yourself in a straight, controlled dip to retrieve a dropped cup, knees first, back upright, the way the narrow skirt requires. The VIP training isn't really about the senator. It's about what you become when you practice for the senator. The dignitary is just the training with a name attached. He arrives once a year. The composure he was supposed to test is on duty every day you are. The airline also keeps a separate list, the one you cannot see and cannot appeal. A complaint goes in. It does not come out. Nobody calls it a ledger, but it keeps a balance, and the balance is whether you kept smiling when the man in 4A was rude, loud, relentless about the ice. You kept smiling. It is not in the file either way. You just keep going. You are on reserve, which means your time is not your own even when you are not working. You wait by the phone for a call that may come at any hour, and when it comes you have a narrow window to be in uniform, groomed to standard, and at the airport. You cannot plan a dinner, a date, or a full night's sleep with any confidence. The schedule is built around the airline's needs and fills in yours with whatever is left over. Being off duty, you discover, is not the same thing as being free. The window is typically 2 hours. 2 hours between the phone ringing and you standing in a jetway looking composed. Your lipstick must be cherries in the snow. Your hair must be above the collar. Your girdle is not optional. The 2 hours are not a buffer. They are a test, and the test has already started before you've fully woken up. Reserve status is where the training makes its full argument. You spent 4 to 6 weeks learning how to carry yourself under pressure, and now the airline applies that conditioning to your off hours too. You don't get to be a person who shuffles around in slippers. You get to be a person in a state of permanent readiness, which is less relaxing than it sounds, and roughly equivalent to sleeping in a starting block. Marilyn, a woman down the hall in your building, keeps her uniform hanging on the outside of her closet door, already pressed. Shoes on the floor beneath it, heels together. Her shoes stand polished at the foot of the dresser, heels together, ready to go on last. The posture is just how she stands now, upright, ready, and quietly braced for a phone that hasn't rung yet. When reserve ends, and you finally have what the airline calls days off, you still can't go far. You still need to be reachable. The phone in your apartment functions less like a household appliance and more like a supervisor who has set up residence in your kitchen and occasionally shouts. You work around it rather than with it. Plans are made in pencil. Everything is in pencil. The airline's reserve pool is calibrated so that not enough of you are free at once to create any administrative inconvenience for them. This is not described as a policy. It is described as a rotation. The rotation, however, has never once inconvenienced the airline. It has occasionally inconvenienced you on your birthday, but the rotation doesn't track birthdays. Pay on reserve is the same base rate, $390 to $470 a month, whether you fly or not. That part is fine. The part that is less fine is that you are also not free to take another job, make firm plans, or leave the city. You are paid to be available. The whole arrangement runs on a black rotary phone in your kitchen that does not care what day it is, what hour it is, or whether you were asleep when it rang. It rang. What saves reserve from being purely punishing is the travel benefit. Nearly free air travel, which in 1963 costs other people around 6 cents a mile, sits in your back pocket at all times. A ticket to Rome for next to nothing. Paris for the price of a cab ride to the airport. You can't always plan when you go, but when the schedule opens you go. The benefit is real. It is also the airline's most efficient management tool, a reason to stay that costs them almost nothing and binds you more securely than a clause in the contract. You fill out the complaint at your kitchen table in your own handwriting and send it to a brand new federal agency that may or may not take you seriously. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has only just opened its doors, and some of the men inside it treat the stewardess cases as something close to a joke. You file anyway, over the marriage rule, the age cut-off, the firing that had nothing to do with the job. You are not the first to do this, and you will not be the last. The form is short, the odds are unclear, and you sign your name to it knowing exactly who keeps files on troublemakers. The EEOC was created under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which means it is, by the time you file, somewhere between brand new and barely standing. The staff is small. The case backlog is enormous. And several of the attorneys inside the building have apparently decided that a woman losing her job because she got married is not quite the same level of urgency as other civil rights violations. They are incorrect. It takes the agency a few years and a drawer full of complaints like yours to agree. Sonia Pressman Fuentes is one of the attorneys at the EEOC who does not find it amusing. She pushes the stewardess cases internally while her male colleagues trade raised eyebrows across conference tables. The eyebrows do not change the law. By 1968, the EEOC rules that mandatory resignation upon marriage is illegal sex discrimination. The ruling is quiet, official, and arrives approximately 15 years after the rule it is ruling against. The rule had been in place since 1953. Nobody held a ceremony. You already know what waits for the women who do nothing. Eula Nix turned 32 and Delta let her go, on the strength of a passenger preference the airlines ran, interpreted, and never once put to paper. The form on your kitchen table is, in part, about her. It is also about the next one. Complaining had its own risk. If you push back on a rule, file a form, contact a union, mention a lawyer, you can find yourself quietly unrecommendable across every carrier at once. Not fired, not disciplined, just somehow never called back, never scheduled. Never considered. There was no official list. Of course there was a list. It worked like a reference you never saw and could never answer, and the only thing it recorded was how much you smiled and whether you'd ever made things difficult. So you make things difficult. You are not the only kind of complaint landing on those desks. In the same years, the same agency hears from women kept out of the cabin entirely for the colour of their skin rather than the date on their birth certificate. The integration fights and the marriage fights arrive in the same mail, and they move for the same reason. Pressure applied from outside the building where the decisions get made. None of it is quick. All of it is somebody filing. The form you filed sits in a case backlog. It will take longer than feels reasonable. The agency is new and understaffed, and some people inside it genuinely believe that the marriage rule is a minor workplace preference and not a federal civil rights violation. They are going to be corrected on this. The correction will arrive slowly, in writing, with citations. That is generally how corrections arrive. You don't get a phone call, you get a ruling date. You are taught how to smile, which sounds absurd right up until you are doing it for 8 hours straight. The smile has rules. Lips parted, never closed, never forced into a grin. You hold it through the smoke, the turbulence, and the passenger who has had 3 drinks before noon. It is the most visible part of the uniform and the one part no inspector can issue you. You have to manufacture it yourself, flight after flight. The face you wear to work is as standardized as the jacket, and keeping it on is its own kind of labor. The 1963 American Airlines training manual calls this passenger psychology, which is a polite name for learning how to stay pleasant in conditions that would make a reasonable person quit. You practice the smile before you practice anything else. You practice it mid-service, mid-crouch, mid-reach, mid-tray, correcting whatever has slipped. Your posture, your expression, the angle of your wrist as you set down the cup. Every gesture is rehearsed until it stops looking rehearsed. You don't bend at the waist, because bending is for people not wearing a fitted pencil skirt with a girdle underneath it. You crouch, knees together, back straight, face level with the passenger, which looks effortless and is not effortless. The same manual that covers the crouch covers the emergency oxygen mask, which you must demonstrate to a full cabin while your own voice stays level and unhurried, because apparently the evacuation drill and the deportment drill have been scheduled for the same 15 minutes. You demonstrate it cleanly, you've practiced. Meanwhile, the cabin itself is doing its best to undermine you. About 45% of American adults smoke in 1965, and your workplace is a sealed aluminum tube at 35,000 feet where all of them are lighting up simultaneously. 8 hours of this is less a flight and more a shift inside a slowly moving cocktail lounge that smells of warmed chicken, jet fuel, and someone else's cigarette. You keep the smile. The smoke doesn't care about the smile. The smile continues regardless. Continental tries something different. Under Bob 6, stewardesses receive reading lists, world history, geography, current events, so they can hold a conversation with a passenger about something other than the beverage cart. It is, essentially, a book club assigned by HR, sitting on the same shelf as the weight chart. You are expected to discuss the Suez Canal and also to look exactly the same as you did 6 months ago when the scale was last consulted. A trainer named Mrs. Aldrich, short hair, sensible shoes, a clipboard she holds like a small shield, walks the practice aisle during your final week and watches your walk. Her face throughout is patient, attentive, and almost entirely unimpressed. Heel to toe, erect carriage. She doesn't say anything when you do it right. She stops walking when you don't. Of course, the smile is not only about pleasantness. The airlines have been competing for years on everything except the one thing that might actually matter to a traveller, the ticket price, because the Civil Aeronautics Board won't let them touch fares. So they compete on you, your posture, your smile, the specific shade of lipstick, named and approved, that you're wearing at 35,000 feet. Pan Am calls for Revlon cherries in the snow, not red, not pink. Cherries in the snow specifically, which is the kind of precision you'd expect from a pharmaceutical label and not a grooming memo. The airline has opinions about your face. The opinions are very detailed. By the end of training, you can execute a crouch, open a 200-pound door in heels, pour a steady cup through clear air turbulence, and smile through all of it without the smile looking like what it is. What it is work, quiet, constant, unpaid. Nobody in the brochure mentions that part. You spend nearly the entire shift on your feet, in heels chosen for how they look rather than how they feel, on a floor that tilts and shifts with the aircraft. The standing is constant, through boarding, through service, through the long stretches in between. Your feet are part of the uniform's problem, expected to look composed while doing the work of a much sturdier shoe. By the end of a long flight, the glamour has a specific ache to it, located precisely in your arches. The standing is the part of the job the photographs never show. The shoes are low-heeled, which is a concession, and they are still heels, which is not. The heel height is specified in the grooming manual, not because anyone has measured the ergonomic load of walking a narrow aisle for 6 hours, but because someone, somewhere, decided a flat shoe red as giving up. The carpet in the 707 cabin is thin, scuffed, and faintly sticky. The floor beneath it is aluminum. Your knees know this by hour 3. The aisle is about 18 inches wide. You are expected to carry a full-service tray down it without touching the seatbacks, without leaning, without letting your elbow drift into someone's armrest. You crouch rather than bend, because the manual says to crouch, and the manual is not interested in your knees. A trainer named Mrs. Donahue demonstrates the crouch at American's Fort Worth facility, sets a cup down on the armrest tray, straightens up, and does not wobble. Once. Then again. Then she watches you do it until it looks the same. The cabin is warm. It's always warm. About 45% of adults smoke, and they are doing so freely in the rows behind you, and the rows in front of you, and directly beside you while you pour their coffee. The ventilation system on the 707 moves the air around without particularly improving it. 8 hours of this is less a flight and more a shift inside a cocktail lounge that happens to be travelling at 500 miles per hour. Meanwhile, the service itself has a sequence, and the sequence is timed, and the timing is known by the chief purser and by you, and by the in-flight service manual, which lives in a binder that someone laminated. First-class passengers receive their meals on china, with silver service, roast beef carved from a trolley, individual baked Alaska, the whole production at 35,000 feet. Coach is a warm tray and the sense that something adjacent to a meal is occurring. You serve both with the same smile, in the same shoes, at the same posture. The trays go out, the trays come back. This is the rhythm of the flight. Between service, you stand in the galley, which is a small metal room at the front or rear of the aircraft with roughly the square footage of a coat closet. There is no chair. There has never been a chair. The chair is not part of the concept. Of course, the Boeing 707 cabin door weighs approximately 200 pounds. During evacuation drills, you are expected to open it, in heels, in uniform, in the full grooming the manual requires, and get every passenger off the plane within 90 seconds. United Stewardesses evacuated a crashed DC-8 at Denver in just under 4 minutes, which is not 90 seconds but is, given the circumstances, an extraordinary number. The same hands that balanced a coffee tray down an 18-inch aisle are the hands on the emergency handle. The job contains both of these things simultaneously, without comment, as if they are naturally the same job. They are not naturally the same job, but the photographs only showed the tray. You are still doing the job when the rules around it begin to fall, one by one. The marriage ban is ruled illegal. The age cutoff is struck down. The word stewardess starts giving way to flight attendant, and men begin appearing in the cabin in real numbers for the first time. You stay through the change, accumulating the seniority the old system never expected you to reach. The training that measured your waist also taught you to save lives, and that part at least was always real. The glamour fades on schedule, the skills do not. The EEOC rules in 1968 that mandatory resignation upon marriage is illegal sex discrimination. The airlines receive this information the way a cat receives a bath, with full comprehension and maximum resistance. United had enforced the marriage ban since the 1930s. American had built its entire 18-month retention model around it. The rule was not incidental, it was load-bearing, and now a federal agency has decided that the structure it was holding up was not a structure anyone was legally allowed to build. Delta fired Eula Nix in 1964 when she turned 32. The rule said 32 was the ceiling, and the rule had been in place since 1953, and the rule was enforced with the same bureaucratic serenity as a parking meter. The airline's official explanation for the age cutoff was that travellers simply preferred younger crew. There was no published evidence for this. There was no passenger survey. There was a position and an assertion and a filing cabinet somewhere full of nothing. Sonia Pressman Fuentes, an attorney at the EEOC, pushed these cases internally while her male colleagues treated them with the seriousness of a lost umbrella. She pushed anyway. The age rule falls too. Staying through all of this means you now have seniority. The old system had a near-perfect turnover rate. Average tenure at American in 1961 was roughly 18 months, because women resigned to marry and airlines fired the ones who didn't. You were not supposed to still be here at 34. You were not supposed to be here at 37 or 40, with the same knees and the same arches and the same crouch the manual taught you, doing it for the 14th straight year. A newer hire named Carolyn hands you a beverage cart with the reverence usually reserved for senior surgeons. You accept it without commentary. The cart is heavy, willful, and entirely indifferent to your seniority, as always. The safety training stays intact through all of it. The 200-pound 707 door is still 200 pounds. The 90-second evacuation window doesn't adjust for the new political climate. You still know how to wrench that door open in heels, how to direct 210 panicked passengers toward the nearest exit with the calm authority of someone who has practiced the exact wording until it lives in the body rather than the brain. That part was never glamour. That part was always the job underneath the job. The uniforms get less elaborate by degrees. The girdle requirement quietly disappears from the updated manual, the way unpopular policies often go, not announced, just absent from the next printing. The Braniff bubble helmet is already a punchline by 1970, which is a remarkable speed for something that was photographed by Richard Avedon only 5 years earlier. Emilio Pucci's pumpkin and grape and chartreuse go with it, replaced by something closer to workwear. Sensible, slightly resentful of its own existence. What doesn't disappear is the institutional memory of the people who stayed. You know the weight of the door and the order of the exits, and which passenger in first class wants the roast beef before you reach his row. You know what the job looked like when it required a quarter-inch of nail and Revlon cherries in the snow and a book balanced on your head. You know the version of the rules that could suspend you without pay for £5. You watch those rules get dismantled, and you are still here, at altitude, crouching in the aisle. Not because the system rewarded you, because you outlasted it. And so here we are at the end of the flight. You boarded somewhere near the start of the jet age, and you've been working ever since. You walked the aisle in heels without rolling an ankle. You served foie gras at 35,000 feet while the cabin filled slowly and completely with cigarette smoke. You crouched rather than bent, smiled with your lips parted rather than closed, and at some point tonight you balanced a book on your head while demonstrating emergency equipment, because that was a real sentence in a real manual that real women performed without irony. You passed the weight check, you wore the girdle, you remembered the lipstick, Revlon, cherries in the snow, named in writing. The nails were a quarter-inch past the fingertip and not a millimetre more. The hair stayed above the collar. The carriage stayed erect. The 200-pound door opened when you needed it to. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you also wrenched a plane full of people out of a crashed DC 8 inches 4 minutes flat. Just a thing you did, in between the foie gras and the deportment drills. The names that didn't make the brochure stay with you anyway. Eula Nix, let go at 32 because 32 was the number Delta had chosen. Ruth Carroll Taylor, hired in February and quietly not hired back. The women who came in £5 heavy on a weigh-in day and were sent home without pay until they were smaller. None of them are in the advertisements. They were there every single flight. So take a moment, if you'd like, to notice where you actually are. Nobody is weighing you tonight. Nobody has specified your lipstick. The chair you're in does not require a rec carriage, and the air is your own. Let your shoulders drop. Let the book slide off your head. Let the girdle, at long last, go unmentioned. Sleep well. Good night.